Welcome to the Education Policy Seminar. My name is Justin Dormal, and I am a first-year graduate student studying early childhood policy at the Curry School of Education. This talk is part of the Education Policy Seminar Series, sponsored by the Bankert Foundation. Each semester, Ed Policy Works hosts a number of talks that are free and open to the public. For more information on Ed Policy Works or the next seminar, please visit our website. Today, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Engel. Dr. Engel is Assistant Professor of Public Policy and Education at Vanderbilt University. She holds a PhD in Human Development and Social Policy from Northwestern University School of Education and Social Policy, and a master's degree in Social Service Administration from the University of Chicago. Dr. Engel has researched in many areas, including teacher hiring, mathematics teaching and learning for young children, and contextual influences on children more generally. The central aim of her research is to provide new information about policies, programs, and administrative factors that have the potential to improve students' school-related outcomes, particularly among children from traditionally underserved populations. She has published in many peer-reviewed journals, including Educational Researcher, Educational Evaluation Policy Analysis, and the Journal of Education, Finance, and Policy. Dr. Engel will talk for approximately an hour and a half and will take questions throughout for discussion. Please note that any questions or please note that any additional or personalized questions after 12:30 p.m. can be addressed via email, as other meetings will be beginning at this time. Again, thank you for attending the Education Policy Seminar today. Please join us for our next talk on Friday, October 8th with Dr. Riordan from Stanford University. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Engel.
Thank you so much. When you said personalized, I was like, oh, what? What happens here? So I'm glad that's what that was. Please feel free to interrupt me, both with questions for clarification and just to engage around what I'm sharing. So interrupt me for any reason. Like, I was trained by interrupters, and I've always been interrupted. It's just the norm for me. I'm super excited to be here. I've never visited Charlottesville or UVA. This campus is beautiful. I have friends from who I was at Northwestern with, friends who I've made over the years of doing this work. So I feel very, very lucky to be here and deeply appreciative. And especially lucky because the conversations I've been having so far with folks from Castle and different places have been just so incredibly rich, and so I would love feedback on this work in particular. The stuff that's already published, it's kind of too late, but feel free. The stuff that I'm going to present some very, very, very preliminary, like so very preliminary work at the end of the talk, and I would love to hear your thoughts about that and what we should be doing and where we should be going, because I don't have clarity on that. So this is work that is part of an ongoing collaboration with Amy Claessens at University of Chicago. The particular work that I'm sharing today was also in part of collaboration with Tyler Watts and George Farkas at UC Irvine. The new stuff that I will talk about is a collaboration with Robin Jacob at Michigan, and also folks, and like all these people in all these places, that it's too much to, I don't even have my head around how it's working, but the acknowledgements here, there've been a lot of people who've given us feedback on this work. This is now a collaboration with NDRC, and particular thanks to the funders for this work. Heising Simons is funding this new data collection. And to Doug Clements and Julie Sarama, who originally developed the COMET, which is the instrument that we're using to do our classroom observations of mathematics instruction. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time motivating what got me to doing the work that I've been doing, and talk a little bit about prior research. I'm going to talk for the most part about this first set of papers that I've written and the most recent paper about trying to look at mathematics instruction in kindergarten and student learning using the ECLSK or ECOLS. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this new study where we're in the field last year and are in the field this year collecting data, doing classroom observations in kindergarten classrooms. This year we're in kindergarten and first grade classrooms in a large urban district. It's very descriptive analysis, work that we have been drawn to because of questions that remain with our ECLSK analysis. So that's what I'm going to be sharing, and I will keep myself moving just to make sure we can get to the meat of it. So early skills, I don't know that I really need to motivate this for this audience or spend too much time here. We believe that early skills are really important, and what we do with young children really matters. From an economic perspective, early might be the best time to invest in terms of the kind of returns to the investment later on. Though there's pushback on this, which I think is valid. From a developmental perspective, we know that early is very important, and what we do with children early on can make a huge difference. Also, we see gaps in skills by socioeconomic status, by race, ethnicity, even way before kids enter kindergarten. So thinking about what's going on for kids early on in multiple contexts, but here I'm going to talk about in school, is important. Work that I was involved with as a grad student and then continued to work on suggested the possibility that early math skills might be particularly important. And this is not experimental evidence. This is based on observations and adjusted correlations. It's been found across a number of studies that Wilson citation is actually from a huge meta-analysis being done in PRI. It's Mark Lipsy's shop at Vanderbilt, where they replicate what we've found with single or several data sets with a massive meta-analytic data set. Right, early math seems to be predictive of later things there seems to be a lot of signal there. Now that's a different talk to unpack what that's about, but not this talk. There's been a lot of advocacy around early math. I don't know that it's gotten that much traction, but NACE, the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics, the National Mathematics Advisory Panel, have all issued position statements, some of them multiple times, arguing that kids are ready to learn pretty complex mathematics in early childhood, and so they're prepared for it. And what are we giving them is what I want to look at. And increasingly we're seeing STEM initiatives that are targeting K through 12 to increase that pipeline. So work that has really helped me think about my own work has been Daphna's work. And so I'm guessing a lot of you folks are familiar with this. And she has wonderfully documented that kindergarten has changed dramatically and rapidly. It has become much more academic. Teachers report spending a lot more time on reading and math just between 98, 99 and 2010, 2011. And there's a more historical analysis that shows that this is something that was developing slowly over time. Jen Russell at Pitt does kind of a document analysis that shows that this academicization was evolving slowly over time, and then the pace has just picked up dramatically. Teacher expectations have changed in terms of what they think kids should be able to do once they enter the classroom, and their expectations of what kids will learn by the end of kindergarten have changed. During my son's kindergarten graduation, the principal announced, and all your kids have learned to read. And I wanted to raise my hand and be like, not all, not mine, but he's fine now. At least in the reading department. And we've had also a push in terms of standards, right? So the CCSSM, the disastrous rollout of this, what is a potentially very useful set of tools, and now other state standards, originally state standards, right, which culminated in the CCSM, focusing on kindergarten, right? There are a lot of things that have been pushing kindergarten in ways that we would think would make it more academic, and Daphne has documented that wonderfully in ways that help us understand what's happening in those contexts. Prior work on early math skills, so digging in a little deeper than the work that work that Greg Duncan and at the time when I was his grad student and his many collaborators were finding about the predictive power of early math, right? So foundational math is predictive of both levels and gains in later math achievement, right? What you know in the beginning seems to really predict what happens later. Kids who have difficulty counting early on later have difficulty in mathematics. And I'm not going to spend time, again, unpacking. I have this desire to unpack that, but I'm not going to because I have other things I need to talk about. But there are conversations to be had there about, what that means and what's malleable there and what's not. And so that's important. I don't want to act as if that's not a relevant thing to have in our minds as we talk about this. One thing we know, and that I've documented, and thankfully others have documented, is that the vast majority have basic counting, so numbers 1 through 10, and kind of basic understanding of numbers 1 through 10, and knowledge of basic shapes at or prior to kindergarten entry. And this is actually true across the board. So if you limit samples to low SES kids or children who are from less privileged backgrounds in terms of race, ethnicity, the vast majority of children can count and know basic shapes at or prior to school entry. Something that we know about early math instruction is that it doesn't happen nearly as much as reading instruction. And there's work, I know Dale Farron has done some work and others have done work documenting that unless they're in preschool, unless a mathematics curriculum is being implemented, Dale Farron has work showing that less than 1% of time in preschool in some contexts is spent on mathematics. So math relative to reading, or early numeracy relative to early literacy, is tremendously de-emphasized. When teachers do spend time on math, it tends to be very basic mathematics content, which is something that I've documented and we'll talk more about. And this continues in the early grades, or at least had been continuing up until whenever that data collection stopped, right? In grades 1 through 4, teachers reported spending about 1/3 of their instructional time on reading, compared with only about 1/6 on math. And I think we can see also that early childhood education has emphasized reading over mathematics in a lot of different ways. Federal spending on reading initiatives has been enormous over the past 15 years. You can specialize in early literacy in teacher education, right? You can become a reading specialist. That's a thing, and there isn't an exact counterpart typically in mathematics, and there's some evidence that documents that a lot of undergrad programs in early childhood ed don't emphasize mathematics, and there's some evidence showing that teachers of young kids are uncomfortable teaching math. So most folks who become early childhood educators or kindergarten teachers don't necessarily do that because they love to teach mathematics. So these are all things to have in mind as we look at, as I show you some of the findings. So I have, my degree is in human development and social policy. So I take I bring a developmental perspective to this work. We know that development occurs through children interacting across the multiple contexts that they encounter. You can think about this in terms of Brown from Brenner's bio-ecological theory, you can think about micelles and person-environment fit. To some extent, I think Vygotsky's thinking underlies a lot of what I've thought about with this work in terms of kind of the zone of proximal development and what kids are exposed to being both within their reach, but also something that they haven't already learned. Within their reach, reaching upward, not downward, I guess is one way to think about it. More recent work has been really helpful for thinking about this work, particularly Connor's work with others looking at child by instruction interactions in reading, right? So that work shows that children learn most in reading when they're exposed to content that is just above their skill levels. And theory in mathematics education suggests the same. This is Sarama and Clements' math trajectories work that has also been super helpful, right? Children's existing math skills should be key determinants of what they're exposed to next. So the first study that I did on this work came about as I was working with the original ECLSK, and we knew about the predictive power of math, and I started to really want to know what kids were getting exposed to in kindergarten in mathematics, and there wasn't much out there on it. So we started to dig into it, and I'll get into that. I'll get into what kids are exposed to in a minute. But I'll summarize what we found in that first study, because I'm going to focus more on this, looking at what things look like across the two ECLSK cohorts and whether things have changed. But in a study that was published in EPA, I and my colleagues found that about 5% of kids start kindergarten without having mastered basic number and shapes. Those 5% of kids gain when they're exposed to that content. The rest of the children, so 95% of kids, actually have flatter learning gains across kindergarten when they are exposed to that content. So the vast majority of kids don't gain when they're exposed to the content that I'm defining as basic, which means that in this case that they've already mastered it. There are lots of ways to define that. And almost everyone gains from exposure to advanced content, and we never find negative effects of exposure to content that is outside of kids' current knowledge, meaning that kids who have not yet mastered basic number, that 5%, we don't show negative effects of exposure to advanced content for them. We find this in math and reading. We find it for kids from families with low income. We find it for kids, and this is the ECLSK, so we have limited measures, but we find it for kids who didn't go to preschool. We find it to kids who went to public preschool, Head Start, private preschool. This is a finding that is consistent across those areas. So the first study I want to talk about and that I'll show you some results for is about what is the math that kids know when they begin kindergarten, what content do teachers report focusing on, and how does that content exposure predict what kids learn across kindergarten. And for those last two questions, I can show you what this looks like in 1998, 99, and then I can show you again what this looks like with the newer ECLSK cohort, and we can see what, if anything, has changed. So I'm guessing folks are pretty familiar with the ECLSK, but I'll talk about these data briefly. This is a data that is collected by NCES, so Department of Education. These are two nationally representative cohorts of kindergartners. The first cohort was in kindergarten in 98, 99. The more recent cohort was in kindergarten in 2010, 11. So you get, there are great things about these data. It's nationally representative. Sorry. It's nationally representative. They talk with parents and teachers and school administrators, and they do direct assessments of children's achievement, and they have parents report on student behaviors and teachers report on student behaviors. In this case, I'm using, and this follows kids all the way through 8th grade, so there's all kinds of cool stuff you can do with these data. Lots of it has been done. We keep thinking of new things to do with it, though, or new to us. So the study I'm talking about, we use data from the fall and spring of kindergarten, achievement assessments and teacher surveys about their own backgrounds and the math content that they cover and the activities that they do in class. And we use a whole bunch of other data as controls, as controls in our models that I'll talk about in a minute. So here we can just briefly look at what changed in some domains across these cohorts. One thing that changed rapidly and dramatically was participation in full-day kindergarten. Under 2/3 of kids were in full-day K in 98, 99, and those kids were systematically tended to be kids who were lower income, less likely to be white, and by 2010, 2011, the vast majority of kids are in full day. The composition of the student population has become less white, more Latino. Age hasn't changed. And just to give you a sense of the number of observations that I'm working with in terms of students for each data set. So women teach the kindergarten. And that didn't change. Kindergarten teachers have become more Latino, coinciding with, although it's still a very small proportion overall of kindergarten teachers, we didn't see too many other changes on these variables in terms of who's teaching kindergarten. So the measures that I'm using in this study, I want to make sure I'm not missing anyone, that folks are following, I'm not talking too fast or slow. So our outcomes are math achievement test scores measured in the spring of kindergarten. And the independent variables of interest are kindergarten math content measures that we created using teachers' survey reports of math content coverage. And I'll go into that in more depth. We control for school entry test scores in reading, math, and general knowledge. And because there's math in there, you can think of our outcome as a gain as opposed to measuring levels. We control for teacher characteristics and teacher reports of child attention and behavior, a host of family background and child characteristics, as well as the information that's available about the teacher and classroom. Okay, so for the first wave of the ECLSK, NCES did something lovely for me because it allowed me to do this work. They haven't released this for the second wave, and to my knowledge, they won't. But what they did was create proficiency levels using the math test. Those of you who've worked with the original K might be familiar with these. This describes the proficiency levels, and in particular, and you'll note as you look at these folks who are kind of deep in thinking about math, teaching and learning are gonna be annoyed in the sense that these aren't, the proficiency level 1 isn't like one single coherent content area, right? It includes 1-digit numerals, geometric shapes, and 1-to-1 counting up to 10. Like that's not one thing. And so it shows you the other proficiency levels. So that first level is what 95% of kids have mastered, where compared with proficiency level 4, right? The vast majority of kids at kindergarten entry have not mastered simple addition and subtraction. So this gives you a sense of what these proficiency levels look like. The ones that are faded are irrelevant for the current study because kids are not scoring them at all, on them at all in kindergarten. They're like 8 kids who can multiply and divide, but I don't think that we want to talk about them today. We took the proficiency levels and mapped them onto the teacher survey that teachers participated in the spring of kids' kindergarten year. So there are these banks of items about what content teachers teach and what activities they do. And what we did with that is take the items and try to create measures that mapped on to those proficiency levels. Does that make sense? Right, so the first proficiency level is basic counting and shapes. We took all the items we could find in the bank of teacher items and created a measure of that proficiency level. And we did the same to the best of our ability with those 4 proficiency levels that seem to matter for kindergarten. So you can see the reliabilities of our measures. Some look a little better, some look a little worse, but we decided they were good enough. You work with what you have. So the thing to keep in mind here is that the reason these measures include the items that they do is not, we weren't saying this is what we think kids should know and this is what we think basic or advanced should be. This is based on what teachers reported on and what those proficiency, child proficiency scores showed. Questions here? Is this making sense? So this is the model that I'll be showing you results from, and it's a basic OLS regression. We're predicting math. The independent variables of interest are those content items that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. And we use a large set, which this is one of the benefits of using this data set, right? There's a large and rich set of covariates that you can include in your model to try to isolate the relationship between the independent variable that you're interested in and the outcome that you're predicting. So this is what I'm showing you now is from the work that I did with the original ECLSK. So these are those student math proficiency levels, and I'm showing you the rate of mastery of each level. So 95% of kids had mastered basic counting and shape, compared with 7% having mastered addition and subtraction. And that's, the numbers are I'm not gonna bother going there right now. I'm also showing you then the content measures we created that I just showed you the alphas for, and the number of days per month teachers reported spending time on that content. So we calculated that. They reported how often, how many days they on average, they taught that content, how many times a week they did it, and then how many times a week, and one other item that let us create a measure of how many days per month they did it. So it's imperfect, but doing the best, the theme, doing the best we could with what we had available. So what you see here is that teachers are, so right here we have our students and what they know. Here we have our teachers and what they do. So vast majority of kids know basic counting and shape, very few know addition and subtraction at the beginning of kindergarten. The vast majority of time is invested in basic counting and shapes, according to teacher reports, and the least time is spent on addition and subtraction. Yeah?
Could something count for multiple levels? So if you're doing addition and you're counting on, would that count both as basic counting and as addition and subtraction, or patterns including shapes and patterns?
It would count in the classroom observations we're currently doing. In the ECLSK, so I'm gonna point out an inherent weakness here that will be really annoying to folks who are on the ground, right, doing field work and observing classrooms. This is a one-shot teacher survey where teachers reported retrospectively approximately how often they did these things, right? So that basic counting and shapes is 4 items from a teacher survey. So my answer here is, my answer to your question is not really, right? It counts in these ways. You wouldn't, it's not what's being measured on the survey. Does that answer?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
How did you control, excuse me, how did you control for the fact that some of the kids weren't tested until like December?
We control for the date of testing.
Okay.
Right, so we control for when we control for age, when the test was, we control for when the test was administered. Yeah, because you have that variation, absolutely. So looking at these descriptives intrigued us, kind of disturbed us. As someone who's a parent of, my first child was in kindergarten around the time I was doing these analyses, and I was like, yeah, that's what's happening. That was certainly what was happening. She didn't mind because she really likes rules, and so she thought it was, whatever they were doing was fine as long as everyone was sitting still. What is wrong with those of you who aren't sitting still? Then she had a little brother who has never sat still, just to remind all of us that we had nothing to do with Maddie being able to sit still. So one of the things that we wondered about, and one of the things that people pushed us on and that was super helpful is, you know, to the extent possible, why is this happening? And actually, that's why we wound up going into the field. But one of the things we wanted to try to think about, and that people would bring up rapidly when we were starting to share these results, is like, might teachers be responding to the children who haven't, that small but important group of kids who haven't mastered the basic skills, right? And might they be targeting there, and might they be staying there until they perceive those kids to have caught up? So here I'm showing you how teachers reported spending their time by the highest proficiency level that the child in their classroom had mastered, children in their classroom had mastered at kindergarten entry. And the take home here is that, for me, is that there's very little variation. Right, so I mean, we do see that if the highest proficiency level that your kids had mastered was level 4, meaning the sample kids in your classroom had mastered addition and subtraction, you do spend 5 days on it, report spending 5 days on it per month instead of 4. And you spend 12 days on basic counting and shapes instead of 13. But that doesn't seem, and we don't have the full set of kids in classrooms here, but that, to the extent that we can tell, that's not what is driving the instructional emphasis that we see. So some descriptive results comparing across cohorts, because we have reason to think, based on Daphna's work and standards and other things that, NCLB, things that developed during this time, we have reason to think that maybe things might have changed between these two cohorts in terms of what teachers are doing. Just a quick note, our addition and subtraction measure, the days per month looks different, and we had to drop it from a 4-item measure to a 2-item measure because in 2010, 2011, they only asked about single-digit addition and subtraction. In the original, they asked about single and double-digit addition and subtraction. It was double was so low incidence in 98 that they dropped it. Super annoying, but that's the nature of the beast. So what we find is that teachers do not emphasize basics, report emphasizing basics any less for the more recent cohort, right? They spend about 13 days per month teaching content related to basic counting and shapes. We see pretty intriguing increases on time spent on the more advanced content, right? 2 more days per month on place value and currency, 2 more days per month on average on addition and subtraction. So do we think this, yeah, Jim?
Mimi, could you go back 2 slides? I was, so I guess maybe I'm confused about the way the numbers get calculated. I was thinking that you went to this 2-item measure for addition and subtraction, and it seems to me that if in this version is 5 days essentially, well, it's 4, I guess on average roughly, but that included both single digit and
Yes.
double digit. It's unclear to me why it increases if you're only including single digit. It seems, wasn't the question either single digit or double digit?
It wasn't either. So there were 4 questions on the initial, and so, right, so,
Which
and
is
that's
the
what this
average.
shows, so it's,
Okay,
you got it?
yeah, I got it, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so they were actually doing, a reason, on average 7-ish days per month on single digit. So that's what you get when you drop the double digit, and that's why those numbers are larger.
Got it.
Okay, questions there? I think I think that would have increased had they left, the time on double digit would have increased had they left it, but, we'll never know. Go ahead.
So for the previous slide, when looking at 1998 and 2011, it looks like the number of days has increased for every single one, but the number of days in a month don't increase. So is the question on the survey asking how many days in a month do you spend on each one of these things, and it doesn't have to total 31 days?
Well, it would total, we cap out at 20
Okay.
because it's school. And then it's,
So she's asking how could all the numbers go up, because it would be a zero-sum game if the numbers available for teaching don't increase.
got it. Okay, so annoying survey things. You could actually, there are teachers who say they do everything all the time, and teachers who say they do nothing any of the time. And they're allowed to say those things. So you can, so everything is going up, and we actually, Daphne shows that time on math goes up dramatically. So these are not exclusive of one another. You could, and we observed that teachers do, spend time on all of these every day. Daphne, go ahead.
Just a reminder of something you said before, but one of the big things that's changing is that kids are in full day kindergarten, so the length of the day has changed, so there's just more exposure to your teacher in a day, and you can fill that with, I think in general, the stuff we looked at seemed to mostly suggest that those like extra afternoons were spent on literacy stuff, but it also gives you time to have more exposure to that.
Thank you, Daphne. Does that answer the question? Thanks. Okay. There are no more days in a month. Or if I'm not the one who's found that, if that is. So what does this matter? And if it matters, how? So what I'm showing you here is the results from the regression, our results from regressions we ran. I'm showing you the full models, right? So we run these also where we just include the individual content measures. We run them with controls, without controls. And interestingly, the results, what we find doesn't vary that much in terms of the content measures. Yeah.
So these math variables, these are numbers of days per month, but do you have anything on amount of time during the day?
Nope.
Okay, that's what I was afraid of, but because, I mean,
Yep.
it may be, math could be like foreign language, doing a little bit every day is what you need, and maybe they've actually, I don't know if research shows this, but, so there could be a response, well, we're gonna do, 5 minutes of math at the beginning of the day, and there could even be less time being spent.
So in terms of, well, okay, they report these, in terms of the content, it's days per month. There are separate items where teachers report the amount of time, so you can back out like hours per day or week or minutes, however you wanna do it. Time on math, just to make people like mine and Daphna's lives difficult, they changed the response categories across the 2 surveys, but the evidence suggests that teachers report spending way more time on math in the more recent survey than they did before. So this is controlling for time on math.
So meaning they report time on math in general, they, in a much more finer grained way than they do time on specific topics within math.
So could you do something like some sort of predictive exercise to try to, I mean, because it's a little bit troubling if the idea is you want to measure how, what kind of math instruction helps and not quite getting at that.
I agree. Yeah, so, I mean, we played around with this a lot, because we sat in that space, and I've been sitting in this space for a long time, and it didn't, I am not the person, my collaborators and I are not the people who've been able to come up with a way to do better than what we've got with the content items. So this is, controlling for the time that you spend on report spending on mathematics. What is the effect of what you've reported content-wise, right? So yeah, keep that in mind. There are real limitations here. It's what's got us out in the field collecting data. So I would love to have better measures. This is the best we felt we could do with what's available in the K. And what we find.
Can I just suggest one more thing maybe you
Yeah.
could do though with the data pretty easily? You could do some pretty simple analysis where you see if the time on math predicts, what do I want to do here? I don't know, somehow I want to do a prediction of kind of the intensity of like addition and subtraction, how that varies with the total time on math. That may actually be hard to do. Just something so you could say something, does it seem to be, so what I'm thinking about is when you add an extra hour or whatever it is in the month, does a lot of that time get added to addition and subtraction, or is it mostly getting added to basic counting? Because if you did that, you could probably say something about, are you under or overestimating kind of the benefits of these sort of more advanced math skills?
Yes. Jim?
I had a similar question because I noticed that the standard deviation on that addition and subtraction is large,
Yes.
right? Especially relative to the mean time. And so I'd love to see more about the distribution of that measure. And I think it goes to this issue that Chris is raising as well, trying to better understand whether there are certain kinds of classrooms or certain kinds of teachers, and whether it's this time on task, because it seems like there's just much greater variation in that last category.
Agreed. We went, so Amy Claessens and I went, so we had this paper that was called Optimal Content, blah, 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 or Optimizing Content, and we kept, so we were in this space, I'm still in this space, like we're collecting data in the field, but we were in this space for quite a while, and we were I'm glad Amy's not here because she'd be like, please stop talking about it, it's PTSD. So we were coding classrooms, and we were coding advanced classrooms and basic classrooms, and trying to categorize teachers and types of instructional environments, and also doing stuff that you'd want to know, like trying to figure out if there were diminishing returns to time on the advanced content, right? So you dummy it out, and time on math, you dummy that out, and we never got anywhere with it. So we would wind up taking a very, very weird, convoluted, not weird, but like kind of going down these paths and looking at the results and presenting them at AEFP or at APAM, and having conversations with folks, or ARA, and we would somehow wind up back here. So there was, right, so when we looked at, what you get when you try and cut it these different ways is that the advanced content seems useful, that more time on it seems helpful. Classrooms where they do it more, that seems good. And so we cut it a lot of different ways and spent a lot of time on it, and then that paper just died on the vine. Because we couldn't, and I think ultimately it's because of the limitations of what you've got in the data. We just couldn't we weren't confident in terms of what we were finding and showing we didn't feel like we were adding value to what I'm showing you here, if that makes sense. So I think the critiques are super valid, and we went down these paths and didn't get very far. That's all I had.
So I fully recognize that you've done a lot of the legwork already and that you spent a great deal of time thinking about this. But I'm wondering, going back to your point of something like a ratio, thinking about,
We did those, yeah.
You did those.
But tell me how, like maybe we didn't do them your way.
my way is the right way.
I obviously.
Just thinking out loud. I don't know, something like something that would allow you to capture an increase in the number of days, but a decrease in the number of hours per day, so that a class that is increasing both the number of days and the number of hours of these higher order addition, subtraction, would, if your hypothesis is correct, would be different than a classroom that increased the number of days of the higher order content, but only did it for fewer hours or for fewer minutes or something like that. I'm not exactly sure how you would create that, or even if you have the data to be able to do a ratio of that nature, but something like that would get at least, I think, at the kind of question that I think you were asking, perhaps.
I'm trying to remember what our ratios were. They were annoying. Is what
They
were.
always are.
It being a single survey, right, so you can't get it at changing behaviors. You can get it what a teacher reports at a single point in time. I think, I ultimately, my take on these comments, and it's not that I don't, maybe it's in there, maybe it's there and can still be done. Like, if someone has it figured out, let's do it. Or do it, and I would love to review the paper and learn from it. Like, we just never got there, though we played around with it a lot of different ways. So so ultimately, to me, it's just an important critique of this work and an important caveat for interpretation of these results.
Am I interpreting the coefficients right? That is, it says you use ECLSK a lot, stars, on the ECLSK. Is that a 1 percentile point gain and 1 percentile point loss?
It is, these are standard deviation uses, these are standardized coefficients.
Literally 1 percentile point gain or loss from the top to the bottom.
So, right, so an additional 4 days per month on basic counting and shapes is correlated with negative 0.03 standard deviation unit, flatter learning gain. And, like conversely, an additional 4 days per month on addition and subtraction is correlated with, 0.04, 0.05 standard deviation unit higher. So these are small effects. They're very small. I also think there's a ton of measurement error here. And if it's classical measurement error, then that would attenuate these downward. And eventually I want to get to a point where I can determine if that's the case or not.
Are they all positively correlated with each other, like classrooms that do more of one thing do more of everything? Or was there enough of a profile of these are classrooms that do advanced things and they don't do basic things? Or is it kind of like the classrooms that do a lot of the advanced things also do a lot of the basic things?
Yeah, so when we went down the rabbit hole, let's just stay in the rabbit hole. So when we were doing this, we at one point had 4 kinds of classrooms. We had basic classrooms who didn't do much advanced. We had advanced classrooms who didn't do much basic, and we had a lot of everything and little of anything. Does that make sense? And you can't, that exists, and you can kind of do it. There's more variation in these math measures. We tried to do it for math and reading at the time. So they're not that highly correlated. if that answers the question. I have the correlation matrix somewhere, not in the main slides, but somewhere we can go. I don't want to go there because I'll never get back here, but I'll show it. Let's do later if we have time. Now, you don't want to watch me scroll through this and get confused. So they're not incredibly highly correlated. They are all positively correlated with each other. It's not the case that basic counting and shapes is negatively correlated with addition and subtraction. But they all are, the correlations are not so large that you worry about multicollinearity at all. That's not an issue, but certainly doing more of, you do more stuff if you do all the stuff on average. Does that answer your question? So summarizing what I've shown you so far, right? Most kids, and this is from the original ECLSK, and it's backed up by other research, the vast majority of kids enter kindergarten having mastered basic counting and shapes. Teachers report devoting the largest number of days per month to basic counting and shapes. In the models that we run, right, controlling for a whole bunch of background characteristics, teacher characteristics, and time on math, the days per month teachers report on basic counting and shapes is negatively associated with math learning across kindergarten for the vast majority of kids. Time on the more advanced content, place value and currency, addition and subtraction, and advanced meaning stuff they didn't already know when they started kindergarten is positively correlated. And the teacher reports of time on the more advanced content has increased across the two cohorts. We see no change in time on basic content, and it is still the modal content area that teachers report spending time on. So lots and lots of kindergartners spend a lot of their time being exposed to mathematics content that they've already mastered at kindergarten entry. It's possible that this time that they spend could be detrimental to their mathematics learning. Right, so the way we've been thinking about this is, kindergarten teachers might not be focusing on the right math content for most of their kids. This could be due to the curriculum that they're using, to the standards that they are held to. It's possibly due, and I had a great conversation with Castle folks yesterday about the fact that maybe they don't know what kids know at kindergarten entry. We assess children in early literacy with a ton, and with, like my daughter, it felt like she was constantly taking the dibbles when she was in kindergarten, because she had dibbles anxiety, because her teacher had dibbles anxiety. It was very confusing. But there isn't the corollary in mathematics. I didn't feel like because now I'm going to talk about my kids. You don't get the sense that teachers are constantly assessing early numeracy in the way that they are assessing early literacy, or that that's something that is out there in the world, in the world of practice in schools and districts. And something we've wondered about is whether there's discomfort around teaching the more advanced skills, going back to this notion that folks don't become early childhood educators typically because they love teaching math, although I've run into some exceptions. So I showed you small effects, and I do think there's measurement error there. But something we've wondered about is, right, these are bigger effects than you find of like teacher background characteristics, bigger than having an education degree or a master's degree. A little bit smaller than what we think the effect of full day K is, but full day K is really expensive. It's a done deal, like that's what we're doing. But something that we've wondered about is, yes, these are small effects, but is it possible that this is something that's more malleable than a lot of other things that we would like to change if we could change it. Right, so this is a potentially cost-effective avenue, if it's correct, for improving early mathematics learning.
So you controlled for time when you ran that regression. What was the coefficient of time, and how important is spending just more time on mathematics to the scores?
Small and positive. So, yeah, an hour more of math per week is associated with like maybe 0.02, a significant 0.02 standard deviation increase in math learning. So time is positive, and then we have, when we interact time and content, I'm trying to remember what those interaction terms, they're either insignificant or some of it's insignificant, and I think we did have, it's not consistent, what we find when we interact those things, and it's because of the measurement problems and the kind of limitations of the survey, it's not clear to me that the interactions are really getting us, it's the proper interaction term, but the data are limited.
Yeah, that helps. I guess what I was trying to do, and maybe there's better measures in the survey itself, this issue about discomfort of teaching math strikes me as kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
And this is not my area, but it strikes me that if I were gonna go someplace, I'd say teachers who sort of felt comfortable with math could make a big difference in lots of ways. Is there any way of gaining insight on that?
Not from the survey, but we're 30 minutes remaining. Thank you. That's one of the reasons we're doing field work and collecting data. So I'll talk about that a little bit, but I think it's not on this slide. But I think this is interesting and important. And what we're left with here is that there are a bunch of things that could be driving what we see. So some of the limitations, and you guys have pointed out a number of the limitations that I think about and worry about with these data, right? These are observational, these are small effects. Lots of when we've published these results, we have rightfully been pushed pretty hard about the survey data, like what we're using to get at this. So the measures of content and measures of time, which was where we stopped and went down the black hole. And so it felt like the only way out of the black hole was to try to get our hands on some more detailed data. And so the idea was like, let's find someone who's already done kindergarten classroom observations, and we can use those data and code them. And then we couldn't find that, or at least couldn't find, we really actually couldn't find it. There's lots of preschool stuff, and then you have stuff, people kept saying the Met, and no one, that's not kindergarten, that starts, I think, in 4th grade, because of what they were trying to do. You wouldn't use kindergarten for that study, because you don't have the test scores, you can't try to calculate teacher effects. So we wound up going into the field, and last year and this year have been doing classroom observations. Last year it was entirely kindergarten. This year we will be doing observations of kindergarten and 1st grade, trying to get at how much time we actually observe teachers teaching math, because, and Daphne and I have had a lot of conversations about this. The time reports you get from the ECLSK, particularly for the newer cohort, are just, it seems like teachers are spending enormous amounts of time on mathematics and reading. And how, what does this actually look like when you're in the field and you're calculating the time they're spending when you observe their teaching? What types of mathematics content are teachers covering during the school day? And we're trying to get at the quality and depth of mathematics instruction, And then we asked teachers some questions about how they decide what math content to teach. And Jim, to what you were bringing up earlier, we asked, there's this single item math anxiety question that was developed by Susan Levine, who's a psychologist who's friends with Daphne's mom, but who's a psychologist at the University of Chicago. And she does work on early math teaching, and this single math anxiety item winds up being very predictive in interesting ways, meaning that they have found in their own work that math anxious teachers have negative effects on girls' math learning, but not boys' math learning. Is that a hand?
I was just thinking, there was an article also, I think, in the New York Times this summer about parents helping kids with homework. And if you're a math anxious parent, it's not really a good thing to help your child with homework.
And my math anxious mother never, ever tried to help me with homework. I can say that. My non-math anxious father didn't either, but I guess that's a different, that's all you.
I don't mean to take you in a different direction, but I'm just curious how you're thinking about quality.
Yeah, so this is using an adapted version of the Comet, which is the instrument that Doug Clements and Julie Sarama developed to observe building blocks, right? So the classroom observation of early mathematics environment and teaching. So while in this case, and that thing is super long, and it's meant for only math, for kind of different, for preschool classrooms. We used some of their items. So in this case, it's about the extent to which teachers asked open-ended questions, and kind of we collected information about what that looked like. The extent to which the teacher encouraged mathematical reflection, which really is about, to a great extent, summarizing and reviewing the content that they're teaching for kindergartners, and reflects back to students and explains what they're teaching and what the students say they're getting. So that's not everything we've got, but that's some of what we've got. Yeah?
This is probably on your to-do list, but there's going to be a lot of variation in what teachers teach across SES classes of kids. So that I would be surprised if for higher SES kids, they're teaching the basic content. And so interactions on all of this stuff might prove really interesting as far as where these differences come in.
So this was one of the paths that we initially were really interested in, and has actually, the subgroup analyses and the interactions have actually turned into, in everything we've published from this using the ECLSK, have turned into robustness checks. And the reason is that there's less variation than you'd expect by the subgroups of interest, and more importantly, and to me very intriguingly, if anything, you have more time on more time period, and remember what Daphne pointed out, that especially for the first K, disadvantaged kids, using traditional measures like underserved kids, were much more likely to be in full-day kindergarten, much more likely to be getting academic content. And I think what Daphne shows is that to a large extent, as full-day kindergarten expanded, advantaged kids were catching up in terms of the content, and I say that facetiously, except that literally, facetiously and literally, the content that they were getting tended to be more basic. And so you have more of everything for kids, for non-white kids, and for kids from low-income households, and for kids who's with parents, with moms with less education, and these different measures of socioeconomic status that we would use. kids are getting more, not less. Now, that doesn't speak at all to quantity and other important, teachers are reporting more. So, yeah, it's, that's, but, and there's not as much variation as you might anticipate.
So will you be matching this to like administrative data on the kids and their families?
The New York stuff, the large,
Your hypothetical large.
I'm super good at this. Tell me all your secrets. I will blurt them out. Alright, I'm recovering.
We didn't hear.
Yeah, the large urban district stuff. You know, there's much less of that. We are able to do much less of that at this point than we'd like to. So this is really largely descriptive work, and we were able to do it on a pretty low budget because we're piggybacking on a big study in a large urban district that was already happening in preschool classrooms. So we're piggybacking on that, doing kindergarten observations, and so we'll be able to, there's some cool stuff we'll be able to do, and then stuff you'd want to do that we won't be able to do.
Well, but I mean, some of that, you leave yourself the option. I'm just thinking, you can even just get their address. You can do census tract characteristics on all sorts of things later, if not now.
Yep.
Whereas if you don't get that information, then you never do it.
No, absolutely. And so this is one of those studies that's tied to other studies and other organizations doing work, right? We're partnered with MDRC, and there are multiple funders, and there are data agreements with the large urban district, and there are agreements about what can and can't be used. And so it's tremendously complex, and we have not, because we're in the field right now, we have not sat down to figure out what we can get our hands on, but that's on the list, certainly. And I think the more information we can get about schools, I mean, the school stuff is easy, right, getting information about schools, but the more granular information we can get, the more interesting this can be. And if we can't get it now, then that's the next study. But what I'll show you now is super preliminary descriptives on trying to answer the questions that are listed here, right? So going from the ECLSK, which is annoying because the survey is very constrained, to our own observations of classrooms, and seeing what teachers actually do in terms of mathematics, how much time they spend on it, what content they cover, what quality looks like with some pretty limited measures, and how teachers report deciding what math content to teach, what's driving this. And we do have that math anxiety measure, but I don't have the descriptives on it. We have wide variation on it. So in the sample in the large urban district, we have 24 schools. They were selected based on having participated in a preschool intervention in 2014-15. Last year, we were in kindergarten conducting observations. My team and I did the full day observation, so we would go out to New York and spend full days observing a single kindergarten classroom. We have 30 of these. Today I'm sharing only these results. We also will have access to 45 math block observations. Those were done by MDRC and will be fully available, but not yet, because complicated agreements, chains of command, I don't, I can't share it yet. That's what I was told. So the observation tool we're using, I mentioned a moment ago, is the Comet, which was originally developed by Doug Clements and Julie Sarama to conduct observations of classrooms doing or not doing their building blocks intervention, right? So this was to be used just to gather information on the mathematics environment and teaching. And we, in particular, there's very careful measurement of the specific math activities, what they call SMAs, that are enacted during mathematics instruction. So we get at both content and instructional grouping and strategies. And so I wanted to go back here for a minute. We wanted the full day observations as opposed to a whole bunch more math block observations for several reasons. One is we wanted to document incidental math that's happening outside of the math blocks. Yesterday, the Castle folks were like, and none? And my response was, no, and a little bit, but not that much. But there are other interesting things that we are learning from the full day observations, a little bit of which I'll show you. But that was our reasoning. And in some ways, the wanting to do the full day observations was motivated by Daphna's work. So the people are really either worried or excited about, depending on who you talk to, the academicization of kindergarten, right? We are ruining the children, we're fixing the children, something's happening with the children, and people feel very strongly about this. And so we wanted to know what kindergarten days actually looked like in a more detailed sense than we could get from the ECLSK.
So are these classrooms, these kindergarten classrooms, also implementing building blocks, or they're not?
Nope.
They're not implementing
Nope.
building blocks? And then
Not
did
at
you
all.
all do the teacher interview portion of the COMET as well, or did you just do the observation piece?
We did not do the teacher interview portion of the COMET. We did not have time, and the district wouldn't let us do it. So we had really quick interviews, conversations with teachers that kind of happened like while we were running down the hall with them and talking, just to get at the most basic things that we were interested in. So we don't have in-depth teacher interviews. I wish we did. So here are some of these very preliminary descriptive results. Teachers are spending, and these are full day observations, close to an hour of math, an hour a day on math. And this was true in both the fall and spring. They're spending close to an hour and a half on literacy instruction. They are spending like nearly 3 hours a day with no instructional content, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means a little bit, and then I think that in our own work we're going to dig in deeper to describing that because it's interesting. And I mean, I sat there so I can tell you what that means. Mostly it means like you're putting on your coat, and because it's kindergartners and they have backpacks and coats and folders and they get distracted and they kind of like, so it's a lot of, there's a ton of transition time.
And do you have the standard deviations for these? I'm particularly interested in the first row.
No,
Okay.
let me make sure that, I said that with confidence, but let me make sure.
Well, you can look later, that's fine.
I don't have them, but I can certainly get them.
So, I had a question about possibly so to what extent is it structural in the schools that they have to spend so much more time on literacy and reading than math? So, in my post-textual analysis of my N of 2, looking at their schedules during the day, they have separate blocks for phonemic awareness, for being a writer, for language arts, and then they have one block for math. So I believe that they're doing math every day, but they treat different parts of literacy, and they have separate materials for each of these blocks.
Yes.
For what I think are literacy skills. And so I wonder, like, even if I was a teacher who was predisposed to wanting to teach math, that structure actually, the materials that have been provided to me and the blocks of time that have been provided sort of requires that all this additional focus on literacy.
That's my impression too. Absolutely, and it goes back to what I talked about a little bit early in the talk, where I think just in general, we have much more of an emphasis in early childhood classrooms and in the early grades of elementary school on literacy as opposed to numeracy. And we know what literacy means. Like we know what literacy we want, you know, all of the kids can read at the end of kindergarten, except for Zach. I don't think most of us have as clear an idea of what numeracy means and what we want that to look like in the earliest grades. Daphne?
Can you talk just a little bit more about the nun area, and like I wondered, first, like lunch, recess,
Yes.
things that are, like do those count
Yes.
as nun time? Like,
Yes.
and also if there was just kind of unstructured playtime in the classroom?
No.
Or that did not occur, or if it did occur, would that be none?
If that did occur, that would be none, but there was almost no unstructured play. Actually, I didn't observe any unstructured playtime, and I think if we break it out, very few people would have in the classroom. So you get, so anytime that there was what we call gross motor, that would include PE, but it would also include at recess, instead of running around and playing, it would include playing, you know, red light, green light, in an organized way with a teacher leading it, just for example.
So just looking at this, you kind of had to label everything as one thing, and if there was a literacy and math lesson, it went into that literacy math category.
Which
Like,
happens 0% of the time.
Gotcha, but so everything was sort of defined as one thing, not a list of categories. You couldn't be a task that was, I don't know what, like science and literacy or something.
You could, we really didn't. I mean, when in the earliest grades, I think when you're doing science 1% of the time, you're also in some ways doing literacy. Sometimes you're doing math, it depends. You're almost never doing it, or where we observed, it was almost never happening. So, no, you could be doing multiple things we didn't observe. We didn't see much of that. Is that helpful? Yeah. So the nun includes, was there a question? Sorry. I do that. When I'm teaching, I do that. People move and I like speak and they're just, so they learn to just, how am I doing on time? Okay, so the nun category is, includes lunch, which you get a lot of time for in New York. Like in Nashville, my kids who are in public school kind of just like they never finish their lunches, and it's not because they're not hungry, it's because they don't have time. There's a lot of time for lunch in the schools that we observed, and typically after lunch, there's a decent amount of recess. But all said and done, that's probably a total of 45 minutes to an hour of the 3 hours of none. And the rest of none is transitions or time in the classroom where you're not having free play, but like nothing's happening. So there is like a lot of time. So I watched kids line up and then follow them. I mean, these enormous schools. And an interesting side note, right? You have these preschool interventions preschools that have been moved into school buildings systematically in New York City. This is an aside, but I think it's interesting to think about because I hadn't thought about it. So all the kindergarten classrooms got bumped into rooms that had been first grade. And the implications of that is that you no longer have space for what we typically think of in kindergarten classrooms, that big space for circle time, right? In my kids' classrooms, a lot of times there would be like an alphabet and you'd have a letter you sit on, or kind of the classroom is structured for that. And I won't talk more about my kid. You didn't have that anymore. Like, these are in kindergartens and classrooms that used to be first grade classrooms. They're tight, and I don't know how much that constrained or changed teachers' behavior. But let me spend a couple minutes going into a little bit of detail on what we saw in terms of math. And this is really the first time I'm so email me if you have thoughts on what we should be doing about this, but or doing about this. How do we fix this? All of the things I've shown you. No, on what we should be doing with these data and thinking about, but so here are some preliminary, very descriptive results. We do see lots and lots of time devoted to counting. Tons of time. We saw it in both spring and fall. We see a huge change from spring to fall in terms of time devoted to addition and subtraction. That seems pretty cool. Hopefully it bears out when we include the math blocks, and this wasn't somehow like anomalous or
It is false, right?
yeah, that's totally switched. Yes, obviously, sorry, yes. Fall, spring, sorry. That's so annoying. I saw it on one slide and fixed it, and I missed it on this one. Yes, so the column, the far right column is spring. There is more time on addition and subtraction. So, thank you, Daphne. So here are some of the shifts we see, right? In the time that there was more time on composing numbers in the fall, and much less of that, and more time on comparing and ordering. So that's where some of that time, and more time on classifying, measurement, and patterning. Very quickly, this is how time was spent in the classrooms that we observed. So the majority of time in mathematics instruction is spent in whole group instruction. Most of the rest of it is individual seat work. In classrooms we observed kids were engaged, and teachers were leading instruction. I don't have that on here. The activities that we observed were by and large delivered very clearly. I did it again. Oh, I wonder if I fixed it backwards. Okay, it's too late. This is all happening right now. Here we are. So again, this is spring. This is fall. Activities were delivered with clarity. We didn't see tons of classroom management problems during mathematics instruction. We saw low incidence of teachers making mathematical errors. Now this is very basic instruction on very basic topics, so I don't know, seeing errors 5 or 8% of the time is not great. It's non-zero. We also saw very, very little open-ended questioning. And we, the modal observation saw little to no mathematical reflection or review. We specifically added an item about scaffolding in the fall. This is where I fixed it. No. And you should stop recording this. So we added that's so sad, it seemed so good until now. Or it felt okay. So fall, spring, we added an item specifically about scaffolding in the spring because we didn't have it in the fall. Or although that reflection review gets added to some extent, we saw very little scaffolding in most of our classrooms. So very few open-ended questions, limited kind of reflection and review, very little scaffolding. And then finally, teachers were most likely to report that the mathematics content that they taught was driven by the curriculum they were using, which was consistent within schools and which was almost entirely, but not, almost universally Go Math, but not completely exclusively. Some teachers reported that they were doing what they did based on what they thought their students knew. But they were still working with the curriculum. They just reported they were adapting or pacing based on what they perceived their students knew. And some reported that they were adapting based on what they thought students should know or should be exposed to. So next steps, and this is just not even, a start on it, but, we're gonna add the data from the math blocks and see what math looks like when we have a lot more observations. We're really curious about whether the instructional quality indicators I just showed you vary by the type of mathematics instruction content that was being taught, and whether content varied systematically by what teachers reported influenced what they were teaching. I had just had this thought in my head about, we're coding the Go Math curriculum to be able to compare the curriculum as enacted with the curriculum that's available. So I have a lovely graduate student who's super annoyed right now because she's deep in coding curriculum, which is not very fun. But that's another piece that will be added to this, is what was available to the teachers, best case scenario if they were sticking with the curriculum, and how does that bump up against what we saw. Thank you.
Probably could do like one.
Any final questions? Yeah.
I just had a question going back to the errors. So when looking at
Going back to what?
When you coded whether they made
Oh, yes.
mathematical errors
Yes.
within the class, and it increased very slightly from 5% to 8%. When you code the math errors, what kind of math errors are they making? Is it just basically they've added incorrectly, or okay?
Yeah. And sometimes, go ahead.
And then just following up, I know it's small, but is there it's a small sample size anyway. Are those errors mainly happening in classes that do have the open-ended questions, or are those teachers more anxious than the other teachers about math?
So this is all next. Those questions are next step questions.
Okay.
In terms of the errors, sometimes they were pretty obviously the types of errors that I just made, where where you know what you mean, but you've written something down wrong.
Oh.
Thankfully, I was corrected, but we didn't see kindergartners correcting the errors their teachers were making, right? So you write down 3 + 2 is 6, or you say that because you misspeak, and no one corrects it, so it's just there. So most often it was that. Those were the kinds of, I'm glad I have an example from my own presentation to draw on. Those were typically the kinds of errors we saw. Occasionally you would see, and we'll be able to use examples once we're writing about this, of what errors look like. Occasionally you would see more egregious errors where it's like, oh, you seem to have a fundamental misunderstanding of some pretty basic mathematical concepts. We also coded whether and how often teachers corrected students' errors and what that looked like. And so that was another piece that